Hi, welcome back to the first lesson about who is an architect. And really, a tricky question for you if you're in the world of cloud. Because what has happened in the last 2 decades is like we had architects who were enterprise architect, technical architect, database architect. All these people have evolved over a period of time, right? So we used to have TOGAF certifications, we had Zachman's approach. Today, we are in a different world. We are in a world of cloud and pretty much dominated with the AI first, the cloud first. This is what we talk about today. But did this role of an AI architect disappear? This is the big questions. Forget the news for a while. There can be a lot of things which people speak. But end of the day, a system requires for you to be designing and really looking at it from a long time perspective for customers. If you work backwards from a customer, you'll always see that it's a very important piece. So, who is an architect? So, let's take some examples here. Let me share my screen and pick up an example for you. Okay, so that all of you can visualize. And what I'm going to do is to show you a architectural diagram, basically to just get you a visualization right. So let me just make it full screen. So I just wanted to cover who is an architect through this diagram. Now, this is a typical example about if you really want to pull an image, imagine it's a no-brainer for anybody to understand. There is a satellite, and you want to really pull an image from the satellite, and then you want to really store that somewhere, maybe into a bucket or into a object storage, and then you want to do a lot of machine learning analysis through it, and finally push that into the UX. So it's a very simple diagram. Now, what does an architect do here, right? So if you really look at, if there are 230 plus different AWS services, as an architect, I would recommend that you know most of these services, because your most of the time your job is to compose these services into a diagram, right? So because you will have to know what are these eight different services. It's going to be like similar kind of thing whether you're working on Azure or a Google Cloud platform. It doesn't matter. Wherever you are, you should understand the designing of this requires for you to know in a very broad based approach. So one of the key role of an architect is designing these diagrams, right? So in this case, you must know ground station is a AWS service which allows you to collect or connect to your satellite, okay, and have these antenna controlled RF over IP, etc. And then you can really look at EC2, which is your compute, and via the EC2, you can create the server and then you can have the storage. And then you create a notebook and you get into the AI world and where you can analyze it and then push it into an endpoint. Okay. And you can further integrate it with multiple applications, create a NoSQL database, and finally use Amplify where you can create user applications who can interact with Amplify on multi-model approach. So broadly, one of the job role of what an architect could do, let's just break it up so that you're very clear, like what does happen in a typical world of architect. Okay, let me open this. So one job role of an architect is designing the art and the science. We can teach you science to tell you that if I have to design something in AWS, use some diagramming tool, go and attend a basic course like Cloud Practitioner Essentials or do an AIP course, you will and have a broad understanding of AWS service, and then you know how to draw this diagram. That is the science part of it. Basically, you can, there's an art into the designing. Okay, the more you study a different diagram, I could always call this to my students about 51 different diagrams. Like I showed you a satellite diagrams, you can download some 500 plus different diagrams. If you analyze those patterns broadly, you will understand how these systems are designed. So an architect designs, okay, there is an art, there is a science. Forget this world which is talking about you can generate this through generative AI, you can use foundation models, keep that away. Even if it generates, you need to prompt it and tell what you want to generate. After it generates, you have to validate it. It's not like something you can have be highly productive architect by using Gen AI, but designing is one of the core skills. Okay, that's a first very important. Okay, so I could call this as the number one skills which has not changed in the 2 decades. It still continues. The way you do it might be different. The second thing you do as an architect is diagramming. So we will talk about this as we go forward, but diagramming means connecting the different services together in a logical sequence. So for that, for example, in the world of satellite, which I showed you, you saw that there is different AWS services working together. Maybe you had used some 13 to 18 services for creating that diagram. For every project, you will see that this diagramming is changing. So second concept is about diagramming, understand design. Now, these every time we talk to any AWS person who has finished or even who have completed a lot of exams, they tell that architect is equivalent to well architected framework, which is a really big, uh, complete no go. It's not true. First important thing for an architect is to be designing systems. Okay, so that is a kind of a skill which you really gain by working with fellow architects, by getting mentored, by looking at all these design diagrams, then you understand how they connect the dots. The third part is basically looking at the workload thinking, because the problem today with the systems today is you might have different workloads. What do you mean by workloads? Could be IoT, it could be analytics, it could be AI, it could be quantum computing. They all will work together. So you must have to understand the workload thinking. Broadly, you cannot be good at everything, but just to know what are the various specialized workloads available and how they can work together is one of the core skills. Even though it's on the cloud, and when we go to the AWS instance, I'll show you all these workloads will have to be connected in a logical sequence. So workload thinking. So first, is too important to design art and science. How do you learn? You can do a solution architect, associate, professional. Still, you'll have a gap if you really don't understand there is a science and art. So please go through the diagrams, go through the real projects, do a POC to really understand, not very academic way of thinking. Once you connect the dot, the workload thinking happens. So what happens after that? The patterns. So a lot of people think patterns has gone away. The Gang of Four, the singleton pattern, all these what we studied in the past is still available, right? So if you're really doing a migration project on AWS, there are some patterns which you can use to really make things faster, right? Similarly, patterns have been there for cloud design patterns. There are workload specific patterns, which are nothing but very important for an architect to understand. The fifth one is the best practice. So when you tell best practices in the world of AWS, you map it to well architected framework. Basically, there are a lot of work which have been done by people. You're trying to put them together into a framework. That's the best practice. Okay, another well architected framework, put them into 6 different pillars. And then for each of these pillars, you could use it to build some kind of solutions. Okay, we'll talk about that in the subsequent videos. The second important thing, which I see more as a soft side, is the person have to have a good continuous thinking, because architect is not a settling job. It never settles, right? Because it keeps changing, new things keeps coming up, something goes wrong. You have to be continuous and strategic. You may not be a master of everything which is shown on the diagram, but overall how the things works, especially in this new world of work, getting to ask the right questions to build something. For example, if I have to build tomorrow as an architect some designing for a data lake, so I could ask the right question to a foundation model. If it is a dumb model which doesn't give me, I might build some intelligence through different mode and then feed it back. And I might create something as an architect foundation model which understands the domain. So that these are job roles which are evolving. End of the day, the domain knowledge what you gain. These are some of the examples of who is an architect. Now, this you can apply to any of your specific workload, but broadly, if you see, they design, okay, they diagram, they have to represent that somewhere, right? And you must understand the workload. Not everybody can become all architects, because knowing the workload a little bit, maybe at level 200 is important. You could always hire a domain expert to get your 300, 400 levels. But if you're really good, for example, in my case, I come from an AI background for decades now. So I'm an AI workload architect, right? But I don't will not be able to do the same justice to something else which is there on my pipeline, right? So I would really work with it. I can broadly understand, but I need somebody. The fourth is about design patterns. We'll talk about that. And then the best practice. And then some soft factors like continuous, strategic, leadership, trying to work with customers on the problem and work backwards. These are some of the characters available. So, broadly, architect is still a very important role. You could give it any name you want, but ultimately, there could be a lot of pattern generations, whatever it is. But end of the day, the personality of an architect is really important. Okay, imagine you're building a chatbot for the future through Gen AI. You still need designing. You still need to draw the design diagram. You still need to validate whether everything is working. Maybe you write the code through your any of your code generation tools or use Gen AI for asking questions, etc. But finally, somebody has to put together. Okay, so this is a very important piece. I would recommend that you go to our resource section, which will come at the end of the course, to really master why you should really take this career. Don't get into jumping into transactions of finishing exams and then trying to look at it, but look at it like this is a personality. So you pay for the personality because the person thinks differently, person thinks continuously, person thinks strategically. They're able to put together things for your customers. That's the skill required. Okay. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching this.